Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. Now, there appears to be more questions than answers over COVID this morning. Will a vaccine surge be enough to stop the spread of the Indian variant? What impact could it have on the next phase of lockdown easing? And should we be flying abroad? Well, the EU is said to be keen to allow fully vaccinated people to head to Europe without quarantine or testing. We'll see if the Education Minister, Gillian Keegan, can clear things up for us in just a few minutes. Also ahead for you, interstellar opportunities. At 10 to 9, we'll be talking to the International Director of the UK Space Agency about a jobs boom in the sector. And a transatlantic curtain raiser as theatres welcome back audiences. We'll talk to the playwright Lucinda Coxton about a new production of her show Herding Cats, which uses actors in London and Los Angeles. That's at 9:45. It's Wednesday, the 19th of May. The pandemic's teenage victims inside the secure unit where mental health nurses are dealing with unprecedented levels of self-harm and eating disorders.
Community teams are absolutely backlogged. People aren't having as many face-to-face appointments. Everything's done over online, and I think a lot of our young people can say it's so easy to lie and say you're fine on an online appointment.
Should I stay or should I go? Ministers' mixed messages over foreign trips amid reports that Europe is ready to welcome fully vaccinated travellers. A failure to plan. The spending watchdog says the government was ill-prepared for the scale of the coronavirus pandemic. Conflict in the Middle East. Fighting continues between Israeli and Palestinian forces, with both sides reporting more attacks overnight. The failures in a cover-up, the investigation which reveals the flaws in some reusable face masks.
And it's a case of sunshine and showers once again today, but later some areas will be mainly dry with lots of sunshine. I'll have the details for you later in the programme.
A very good morning to you. For well over a year now, the coronavirus pandemic has had an impact on all of our lives, and of course, it's claimed many victims. Some of those who've suffered have been less visible than others, including the large number of young people who've seen a deterioration in their well-being. Well, 2/3 of young people say their mental health got worse during the lockdowns. They're more likely to have experienced poor mental health than adults, and that has led to a doubling of referrals for help with eating disorders. Recent NHS data shows a 4-fold increase in the number of children and young people waiting for urgent care, and a 129% increase in the number waiting for routine treatment over the last year. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has spent the last 3 weeks with the staff and patients of the Pennine Care NHS Trust, and just to warn you, his report on their work has references to self-harm, suicide and ligatures, images of self-harm, references to eating disorders, and pictures of nasogastric tubes.
The first thing you notice here are the locks. There are locks on every door.
This is our airlock. Because a lot of the young people are detained, it's just an extra security measure. So one door has to lock before the other opens.
I see, OK.
Inside, it's an uneasy combination of children's ward and prison wing.
50 milligrams of sertraline, which is an antidepressant. 50 milligrams of quetiapine. It's a antipsychotic for low mood and suicidal ideation.
This is a place where severe illness meets severe treatment.
Should we cover it up just so it don't get infected, yeah? Yeah. Oh, I've got to clean it off anyway. Come on. Well, at least this will stop anything getting into it.
So this is Horizon Ward. This is a 10-bedded unit. 6 of these beds are for eating disorders.
It's 7 a.m. and night staff hand over to the day team.
She did tie a ligature at 10 o'clock.
It was removed by the ligature knife. Physical observations were completed. There were no concerns. It was quite tight, so she was gasping for breath afterwards. So she did have a brief period of head banging at 11 o'clock. We followed the management plan, went in every 5 minutes.
Horizon is a secure psychiatric unit for children and young people. And meal times can be difficult in a place where no one wants to eat.
It's the most difficult part of the day.
First, patients are offered food. If they refuse, they're offered this.
What's in it?
Ultimately calories, but more than that, it's like all the nutrients.
Yeah.
So vitamins, minerals, everything that the body needs to sort of function on a day-to-day basis.
The pandemic is fueling an alarming rise in eating disorders. In the past year, cases have doubled. And demand for beds on wards like this one is up by a fifth.
She won't come out at the moment. Sometimes she comes.
It's not long before they discover that a patient is refusing to eat.
Are you sure there's nothing we can do to help? Because I know it's really difficult. We need to try and beat it, don't we? And not come out for a little bit.
Nurse Kat tries to support the youngster, but time has run out.
15 minutes, we draw the feed up and bring her out.
Does she know
Yeah,
that the clock is ticking?
yeah. So the young people are aware of it. They know the timings really well.
This is what we call an NG tube. It's inserted through the nostril, goes up and then down the esophagus into the stomach, and it allows us to syringe feed. It's the only way. Either you do something quite brutal or you let a 14-year-old, 15-year-old become so physically compromised that they could ultimately die or go into organ failure.
The eating disorder anorexia nervosa has this young girl in the tightest of grips. Supported by nurses, she's taken to a room, and behind this door, that high-calorie formula is injected into the feeding tube.
I don't know how to feel about it, really, having witnessed it. This is the end of the process. And we've just seen that young girl being marched down that corridor by nurses who describe this as not a battle between nurse and patient, but a battle between nurse and eating disorder. This girl doesn't want to eat, but now she's being forced to eat.
We're seeing a massive increase in young people that are coming in and saying, I tried to get better at home, and the support just wasn't there because the community teams are absolutely backlogged. People aren't having as many face-to-face appointments. Everything's done over online, and I think a lot of our young people have been saying it's so easy to lie and say you're fine on an online appointment, and it's not until they get to the point where they're probably bordering on coming in here that we realise how severe things actually are.
But there's a problem. There just aren't enough of these places to meet this surge in demand. And so a crisis is now emerging. Nick Martin, Sky News.
Well, look, if you've been affected by any of the issues in Nick's report, you can talk to the Samaritans. They're on 116 123, or the eating disorder charity BEAT. Now, their helpline is 0808 801 0677. Let's talk to the Education Minister, Gillian Keegan. Morning to you. Look, it's hugely disturbing seeing what these young people are going through, whether it's an eating disorder or other forms of mental distress that they're going through. I mean, clearly, there needs to be more done here. What can the government do?
I mean, it is very distressing and, in fact, very familiar. I have a family friend who went through exactly that experience, so it was distressing, actually, to watch. I mean, obviously, the government's putting a lot more emphasis on mental health, a lot more support into mental health and a lot more investment into mental health and also investment into mental health at schools. But when you get to this point, which is highly specialist, and this is incredibly dangerous, then obviously it's really about getting that support to young people at the right time. And it is distressing, but also it is worrying that there is an increase in this. And mental health in general. The pandemic has taken a terrible toll on many of our young people, but it was particularly distressing, yes.
I mean, what we're seeing there, though, is a lack of facilities to provide the urgent care that young people need. Now, this may have been an unexpected side effect of the pandemic, but because those beds, those specialist wards are needed urgently, can you say the government will look into this?
Yes, and we have been looking into this. I mean, this has been recognised as an issue, and to be honest, it's something that even before the pandemic was something that we were concerned about. And those highly specialised beds that you saw in your clip, there aren't enough of them, and in particular access around the country. But yes, it is definitely something that we have a huge focus on. Mental health in general, but eating disorders, self-harm, and young people's mental health is particularly concerning.
Look, can I ask you about the Indian variant? How concerned is the government at the way the Indian variant has appeared across the UK and now may be spreading? What can be done? Is surge vaccination going to be enough?
I mean, obviously, these new variants are always the centre of our concern. That's the thing that's we've always said as we emerge from the pandemic, as we get most of our country vaccinated. These are always the things that we need to be really wary about. It looks like there's good news that the vaccines work against this variant, but obviously surge vaccinations, surge testing, all the things we've got in place, are part of our system working, and our genome sequencing has actually allowed us to identify this variant quite quickly and be able to act. And that's really all you can do with a virus like this. When you've got something that can mutate, there's thousands of variants of this virus.
Well, I mean, forgive me, it's not all you can do. I mean, the problem you've got here, and surge vaccination could well have a very big effect, but not for another 3 weeks. It's going to take 3 weeks for that first jab to even begin to kick in. What needs to be done before that? I mean, one expert from SAGE, Dr. Zubaida Haq, has said, to quote her, "It is astonishing the Prime Minister has gone ahead with the third stage of the roadmap, given the government didn't pass all 4 tests for easing the roadmap, because this is a variant of concern."
Of course, but this, everything is about balancing risk, and the data we have at the moment, the scientists that we work with, we've taken that decision that this gentle unlocking. And by the way, last night, this week's unlocking, as it were, is effectively being able to meet 6 people inside. So it's not exactly sort of unlocking everything. It is a cautious step along what has been quite a long roadmap as we emerge out of the vaccine, out of the virus. So these are all balanced risks. They're balanced risks, but we do believe that this is now the time for personal responsibility, cautious personal responsibility. The British public have been amazing, both in getting the vaccine and adhering to all the lockdown rules. They've been absolutely amazing. But this first step is the first step in the next road of the journey, and we think it's the right step.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a variant of concern, which does question whether the 4 key tests for releasing the lockdown this last Monday were actually met. But even in terms of the Indian strain itself, I mean, should the government have acted sooner in putting India on a red list? I mean, never mind the fact that we're still getting hundreds of flights heading in from India at the moment.
Well, this variant of concern was actually identified about 2 weeks after we put India on the red list. So it was identified, it was checked, and it was about 2 weeks after we put India on the red list that it was this variant of concern that was identified. And that's what we're dealing with. If you think we can go back in time, or we can anticipate where a variant's coming from, which ones are going to be of concern, and not at the moment they appear. That's not how this virus works, and that's not how our response to the pandemic will work, and it's not how we will work as we try to unlock our country.
Yes, but there is a big question, and it is a big if. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks, but there's certainly a possibility, because this is so much more transmissible, that actually not acting in a stricter way now could mean that the 21st of June just goes out the window.
No, not necessarily. I mean, the big thing that we have to do...
Well, not necessarily, but, I mean, forgive me, even the Prime Minister admits that's a possibility.
Of course, everything in the future is a possibility. You can only deal with the evidence you have at the time. Of course, that's the case. These plays on words are not that helpful. But, of course, anything can happen. But what we're doing is we have the biggest vaccination programme, as you know. We've got the country with the most take-up of vaccine, which has actually put us in an extremely good position. And actually in Bolton and in Blackburn right now, we've got many, many more people coming forward for the vaccine, and that's great news. So that's our key message: is get the jab when you're asked. We're getting to you as soon as possible, and hopefully we'll get to all adults in the UK before the end of July. That's our mission, that's our goal, that's what we're doing, and that is what's protecting us ultimately. And the case rates at the moment, it's just over 2,200 and odd cases. Clearly we are worried about it growing, because we saw what happened with the Kent variant. Once these variants become highly transmissible, they do transmit very quickly. But we're in a very different place with the vaccine than we were in December, when we first identified the Kent variant.
I mean, what should people do in terms of travelling? We've got the green list, of course, all well and good. What about the amber list here? Should people be going to an amber list country?
No, there's some special circumstances that you're allowed to, which is why they're on the amber list, which is, for business, for mourning, funerals, those kind of things, for serious individual cases with, family health, etc. But by and large, what we're saying is, the amber list it's not to go on holiday, not for pleasure travel at the moment.
But it's not illegal to do so anymore, is it? There are no fines attached should you want to do that.
No, and to be honest, it's not in legislation. This is guidance from the government. We haven't legislated to ban people from going on holiday at all. This is guidance, and as in many of these things that we've had throughout the pandemic, this has been about really allowing on the great British public, relying on them being sensible and looking at the guidance that we put in place and taking their own decisions, really. But no, we wouldn't advise going on holiday to the amber list countries.
Yeah, we understand 150 flights. It's been reported actually by some media groups. 150 flights departed to amber list countries on Monday. People are wanting to go. They're going to go, aren't they?
I don't think there's that many people going on holiday right now, which is why you hear from the travel industry a lot. I worked in the travel industry for many years, so I know that's the case. But there's many reasons, there's no way. We're a very highly international island. We're very, very integrated and connected with many, many places. So there's lots of trade, there's lots of business travel, there's lots of people who do come from our country, even when you've got travel bans in place, or you've got travel restrictions in place. That's the kind of country we are, which is why our strategy for the global pandemic has not been to try and completely lock down all of our borders from the beginning and not let anybody in and not let anybody out. That works for some countries. You've seen some countries exercise that. That doesn't work for our country. Our strategy is to vaccinate everybody and to then cautiously open up our economy, and then hopefully we can start to get back to normal with a system that enables us to, with the best genome sequencing system in the world, identify those variants. Obviously we have very tough measures at the border. You have to take a test on day before you come and on day 2
but forgive me, there's a lot of scientists, not all, but a lot of the leading scientists on this are saying, look, banning flights from India would have been a sensible move. I mean, can't, even with hindsight now, can't you say, well, yeah, perhaps we should have looked at that?
Well, we did. We did actually stop We put them on the red list 2 weeks before we identified that variant. And the reason we did that was because of rising case numbers. And obviously they had rising testing, which was enabling them to see that, but also the positive test. Everybody who flies here, before you fly here, you have to have a negative test. And then you have to have a test on day 2 and a test on day 8, because of course you may miss actually the viral load. That is a very tough system. And that's actually how we got the data to identify this variant.
Minister, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to bring you some breaking news, and the inflation figures for April have just been released by the Office for National Statistics. Let's find out what they are from our economics and data editor, Ed Conway. Morning, Ed.
Morning. Inflation, of course, is the key measure of just how fast prices are rising around the economy. And of course, during the pandemic, it fell quite sharply. It's a pretty good measure of just how much spending is going on and what kind of activity is happening. And of course, the Bank of England, its job is to try and keep inflation as close as possible to 2%. So anytime it's kind of varying away from that, or anytime it's moving sharply, people get a little bit concerned. And what you can probably see here, this chart just shows you the latest numbers, but also going back the last few years. And you can see that in the period over the pandemic, so that area in the last few months, it was really weak. It was quite low down, getting close to zero. But what's happened in the latest months, so the latest data that we have is showing that it went up from 0.7%, which was quite low, to 1.5%. Now, that's a very big increase when you're talking about month-on-month changes. The kinds of things that have contributed to this, household items, clothing as well, utility bills have started to push it up as well. And if you just look simply at the difference between last month, so the previous month, which is March, and April, that is one of the biggest increases month-on-month that we've seen in this index. And some people might look at that and say, well, there is cause for concern here. Although it's quite far still below that Bank of England target of 2%, there are concerns around the world that what with governments pushing so much money into the economy to try to get it going, including not just in this country, but in the US as well, even more so, that might start to push up prices. That's happened in the US, where they have inflation of over 4% now. And so the question is whether the Bank of England is going to look at this and start thinking, well, it is time to be concerned about this. Nonetheless, still below that 2% target, but rising relatively quickly now.
OK, Ed, thank you. Now, there have been reports the Israeli military has launched new attacks on Gaza overnight, with Hamas firing rockets back across the border. Well, the continued fighting comes despite growing international calls for an end to the violence. At least 218 people, including 63 children, have now been killed in Gaza, 12 people killed in Israel. Let's get the latest from Alex Rossi, who's in Jerusalem. I mean, the fact that these are continuing still, Alex, despite these calls for more diplomacy, is hugely disturbing.
Yeah, the Israeli Defense Force said it would be an intensive night of bombing again in Gaza. They have been attacking what they have called the metro system. This is the underground system of tunnels that Hamas fighters and other Palestinian militants use to get around the coastal enclave underground and launch rockets and mortar fire into Israel. Now, we've also heard sirens ringing out again across southern Israel. Barrages of rockets have been fired throughout the night, so no let-up in the fighting. But the diplomacy continues, albeit at a very slow pace. Yesterday, the United Nations Security Council met again, but reached no conclusion. Interestingly, the French, in coordination with the Jordanians and the Egyptians, have now filed a resolution at the Security Council. But that could take some time because the wording will need to be very precise and very careful. Otherwise, it may very well be vetoed by the United States, which has already blocked 3 statements at the UN. But of course, the humanitarian situation, the suffering continues, particularly in Gaza. The number of dead now, 218, including 100 women and children, according to the Gazan Health Ministry. Basic services are becoming at the point of near total collapse. Fuel supplies are running out. Some supplies did get in yesterday through the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is run by Israel. 24 trucks of medical supplies and food, but that was very quickly closed after Palestinian rockets and mortar fire hit that position. So a pretty depressing scene really here this morning that we are seeing across this area. No signs yet of a ceasefire. The hope, of course, is that the diplomacy will win out sooner rather than later.
OK, Alex, thank you. Now, India has recorded another record day for COVID-19 deaths, reporting 4,529 fatalities. It brings the country's total death toll from the virus to 283,248. India has now recorded more than 25 million cases of COVID-19. France will begin the next stage of its phased reopening today. Restaurants, cinemas, museums and non-essential shops are amongst the venues that can welcome people back. Mask wearing is currently still obligatory in all indoor and outdoor public spaces across the country. Spain has deployed its military to patrol the border with Morocco after about 8,000 migrants crossed into the country. A sudden influx of migrants swimming into the Spanish enclave in northern Africa has resulted in a humanitarian crisis, people needing to be rescued from the sea, suffering from exhaustion and hypothermia. The New York Attorney General's office has opened a criminal investigation into former President Donald Trump's property company. The Attorney General, Letitia James, has been investigating whether the Trump Organization falsely reported property values to secure loans and obtain economic benefits. The Trump Organization denies any wrongdoing. Well, let's return now to the spread of the Indian variant of COVID-19. One so-called hotspot is Bedford, where 80 confirmed cases of the variant have already been found. Many of these infections are in those who are yet to receive a vaccine, including young people and school children. Becky Johnson reports now on the effect that rising infections are having on schools in the area.
In places where the Indian variant is spreading rapidly, it's young people who are catching it in large numbers. Here in Bedford, a spike in cases has hit schools. At Bedford Academy, many classrooms are almost empty, with a quarter of pupils at home isolating.
We've had nearly 50 cases in the last 5 weeks since we've returned, since half-term. Previously, in the half-term before that, we probably had 4 or 5 cases that were confirmed in the school. So in terms of isolation, we've probably had upwards of 500 students that have been self-isolating over the last 5-week period. 300 of those have been over the last 2 weeks.
Pupils that are still in school worry they'll be next.
You can just see people coming in and out, having to go back home because they've been in close contact, so it is quite worrying.
The rapid spread of the Indian variant here in Bedford is mainly in people under 40, which on the one hand is good news because it suggests older people are being protected by the vaccine. But for those yet to have their jab, who still have to mix at work or at school, it's a big worry. 15-year-old Eva was sent home to isolate after a classmate tested positive.
It is quite worrying because most of our year is asymptomatic. I could be just walking around and then transmitting it to someone who could then be really seriously affected by it.
I don't want to catch it. I don't want my friends and family to catch it either.
Teaching unions warn what's happening in Bedford could be repeated elsewhere.
My guess is there will be other new variants at future points. So what's the plan from government around all of this? And it just seems to me the assumption that we don't have to worry about things is really unhelpful. And in particular, those young people in lots of schools who are having to self-isolate and at the same time know that they should be in school doing their assessments because their exams are going to be making judgments about them this year, they are particularly concerned.
Young people are still trying to catch up after so much time has been lost. But unprotected by vaccines, they now risk spreading a variant that's even more contagious and difficult to contain. Becky Johnson, Sky News in Bedford.
OK, let's see what the weather's going to do for you today. It was a bit grim yesterday, certainly where I live. Is it any better today, Naz?
A bit better later, actually, but it's almost like the calm before the storm, because we are going to see very wet and windy conditions through tomorrow and Friday.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Well, hiding behind me is an area of low pressure that is moving in off the Atlantic and through tonight, tomorrow and Friday. It's going to bring very wet and windy conditions across much of the UK and Ireland. Until then, it's a case of sunshine and showers today. This morning, though, it's cloudy with showery rain across parts of central southeastern England. That will clear away off into the North Sea before midday, and some patchy rain across northern and eastern parts of Scotland, moving down towards the central belt. Elsewhere, sunny spells and showers, but later, high pressure building from the west, so fewer showers across western areas and some central parts. So the main focus of the showers today will be across northern and eastern areas, and much like previous days, they will be heavy and thundery before the wet and windy weather.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we'll talk to the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, about his concerns over the spread of the Indian variant.
It's time to call it out for what it is. I call these police departments the Ku Klux Klan with badges on.
I can't breathe.
We are going to make sure that we have the city under control.
Guilty, guilty, guilty.
People are dying.
Well, I think one of the things that we've all realised during this pandemic is how important our well-being and our mental health is. Now, of course, it's important to separate mental illness from well-being and health. But I think all of us have wanted to take control, I think, and do a bit more to look after ourselves ultimately. And, you know, whether that's getting outside more often, catching some natural light, exercising, communicating with those that we hold dear, making sure we're managing our stress effectively, we're sleeping well. All these things play a part into how we feel. And so, you know, that's why I wrote the book Live Well Every Day. I wanted to kind of bring the science out there, my personal experience and my professional experience, and put that together into, I guess, key chapters that people hopefully can use to improve their own health and ultimately feel better from it. I think it's been different for everyone. Everyone is different. Everyone's an individual, and I think the pandemic, in whatever way, has put pressure on everyone. Whether you're on the front line working in A&E, or you're working as a carer, or whether you're at home shielding, you know, and there's so many people that have felt so much stress and pressure for different reasons, or isolation, and it's impacted everyone. You know, and if you look at even, you know, the roadmap at the moment, people going back, you know, coming out of this pandemic, some people are really wanting to rush back to busy shops and get going again. Others are much more cautious. And I think this pandemic has really, really taught us to listen to the way we feel, do things in the way that we're comfortable to do, and especially going back to, you know, normality. You know, take things at your own time and look after yourself. I really, really, really hope that a lot of the things we've learned from this pandemic about self-care, about investing in yourself and your own time, your own energy, will take that forward after the pandemic, because a lot of us have been burning the candle at both ends for far too long.
Now, the government says it's relying on the British public to be sensible and take responsibility when travelling abroad. The Education Minister, Gillian Keegan, told me a short time ago it's not illegal for people to travel to amber-listed countries, but the government would advise against it.
It's not in legislation. This is guidance from the government. You know, we haven't legislated to ban people from going on holiday at all. This is guidance, and as in many of these things that we've had throughout the pandemic, this has been about really allowing on the great British public, relying on them being sensible and looking at the guidance that we put in place and taking their own decisions, really. But no, we wouldn't advise going on holiday to the amber list countries.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Kate McCann. I mean, in some respects, that's not overly helpful, is it? I mean, people are wanting to go abroad, and they're not actually being told what to do. Just make up your own mind, but we don't advise it.
I think there was a really interesting phrase, actually, that Gillian Keegan used in that interview, which was that we're moving into a stage of cautious personal responsibility. And you're so right, because people's risk balance is going to be completely different depending on how they feel. Some people, you know, we were talking before we came on air, some people will have been cooped up in a small flat for the last year or so, and a holiday will be really important to them. So they might think that it's, you know, less of a risk to take that holiday than other people might. And this is the problem the government now has, because you can't keep making really restrictive policy forever. At some point, you do have to move into a stage where people are taking the decisions into their own hands. Case numbers are still relatively low. Deaths, thankfully, are the same too. But the concern at the moment is the lack of data, I think. We just don't know how well the vaccine is acting against this Indian variant. We don't know whether the vaccination surge programme is going to be enough to hold it in some of these areas where we're seeing it gather pace, and that's the problem for the government. That's why we're on this watch and wait brief, and that's why the Prime Minister and his ministers are still hesitant when it comes to whether or not that June 21st opening date is going to happen. OK, Kate, thank you. Well, the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, is here in the studio. Good to see you this morning. Look, in terms of travel advice, I mean, what's the Labour Party's take on all of this? Because it's not illegal to travel to an amber country for a holiday. The government has changed that now, but advising us not to go anyway. It is a bit confusing.
It is a bit confusing, and I think people just want clarity, because people want to do the right thing. I mean, people are feeling so desperate. There are people who will want a holiday. I mean, I was in the House of Commons on Monday, and Matt Hancock was asked explicitly about this. Should people go on holiday if the country's on the amber list? He said no, they shouldn't. And another Tory MP jumped up and said, well, you've effectively made the amber list the red list. So people just want clear guidance about what is the right thing to do.
Would you go?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, at the moment, I'm planning on going on holiday, I suspect, to sort of Devon or Cornwall or somewhere, if I do get a holiday this summer with my kids. But I probably wouldn't have introduced the travel, the international travel restrictions easing this week. I'd have done it in a different way. But our Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds, has long been calling on your programme and other programmes that we need a comprehensive borders policy. I mean, our borders have been about as secure as a sieve throughout this crisis, and it's why we're seeing these variants bounce at us. The variants bounce across the world and they come and hit us. And there's probably going to be more of this as well. So we've got to work internationally to bring infection rates down and to make sure the world is vaccinated. But we've also got to have secure borders and controls as well.
Well, look, I mean, there are lots of arguments over whether more should be done to stop travel from India at an early date. I mean, it's not even stopped now, but the Indian variant is here.
Yes.
What should we be doing?
I think there's a number of things now we've got to do to quickly contain this variant. We understand, and I understand, that Boris Johnson can't give you a cast-iron guarantee around June 21st, and I wouldn't expect him to. We've got to be grown-ups. This is a period of uncertainty. But what he can do is take all necessary action now to try and protect that June 21st date. So I would do more vaccination in the areas, the Bedfords, the Boltons, the Blackburns. I'd really surge it for everybody. I'd give the local councils the resources to do enhanced contact tracing. I'd make sure that premises and buildings have air filtration and ventilation support systems in place. And crucially, I would pay people decent sick pay and financial support so they can isolate. We've still got a situation whereas if you are low paid and not eligible for decent sick pay, you are forced with that choice of either going to work when ill or staying at home and not being able to pay your bills. That is not fair.
The problem is when you listen to the scientists, they have concerns over surge vaccinations. Not that it won't work, but it's not going to work for at least 3 weeks. So, you know, under those circumstances, and I know it's hugely unpopular, do these areas need to be locked down for the next 3 weeks?
Well, I mean, I hear different points of view from scientists and public health directors. Some say because you're dealing with a younger cohort of people that the vaccination will begin to take effect within a week to 10 days. So there are different opinions out there. But I think that, you know, I'm the MP for Leicester. I live in Leicester. You know, we've been the city that was locked down for a year. All right, we came out of lockdown, we're winning the FA Cup, so we're very pleased about that. But I know how difficult local lockdowns are. I don't want to see Bolton and Bedford and Blackburn go into local lockdowns. We tried whack-a-mole. That's when Boris Johnson used to say that was the approach. But you can take action now to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the problem is with all of this, whatever is decided by the government on this, there is always going to be alternatives that will come forward as a criticism. Now, you've got to accept that, haven't you, as an opposition, that there is no perfect answer to this. You know, it's not as though the government hasn't got the answers and you have. It is quite simply a difference of approach, isn't it?
Look, as I say, throughout this crisis, I've always tried to adopt a grown-up, sensible approach because we're dealing with uncertainties. We are dealing with dilemmas, and I understand that. But there are a number of things that we've not done as a country that have been done in other countries across the world who have been more successful in their response. And it does come down to the things like sick pay, isolation support, making sure that some countries offer, for example, hotel rooms for people to isolate themselves from their families if they live in, you know, congested housing. There's lots of things that we could have tried, which other countries have tried, which we never did.
What about, I mean, her name escapes me at the moment, but one of the key members of the SAGE group saying, because of the Indian variant being a variant of concern, we didn't meet the 4 tests to reduce the lockdown last Monday. Would you agree with that? Would you have gone ahead with this week as we have done?
No, we were going ahead. We were backing the call to go ahead because I think when there's so many, you know, businesses had invested so much in preparing for Monday, you know, we've got to understand the economic consequences of these decisions. That's not to say that you're putting the economy ahead of dealing with COVID. It's a recognition that economic outcomes and health outcomes are interlinked. But if you're going to go ahead with easings like we've done, you've got to make sure your fundamentals are in place, like sick pay and ventilation and air filtration systems. I mean, there's experts now who have developed technology which improves the air quality in supermarkets and big sort of pubs and so on. And those premises, those businesses should be getting grants, should be getting support from government to install this new technology.
Look, we're running out of time, but can I ask about the internal review into the handling of the pandemic? Because I know you want the government to publish that information. Why do you think that's important to hear that now?
Because I think transparency improves decision-making. And as it happens, it's not just me saying it, it's now Mr Dominic Cummings. Perhaps surprising that I would be agreeing with Dominic Cummings given the last 12 months. But Dominic Cummings is saying all these things should be published because when you get proper transparency, when you can scrutinise government decisions in real time, it leads to better governance, it leads to better decision-making. And I think better decision-making is in the national interest.
Look, really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you. Now, new figures have been released today showing the extent of child poverty in the UK. Data from the last 5 years show that even before the pandemic, 4.3 million children were living in poverty. Well, let's talk to Ali Fortescue, who's got the latest from the newsroom. So what are these latest figures showing, Ali?
Well, they're pretty stark and crucially, they're from before the pandemic. So they define a household in poverty as a household that has less than 60% of the average family income. So that would be a household of 1 adult, 2 children with less than £280 a week after paying for housing. Most of these families, they say, are single-parent households. And the problem is starkest in cities, so places like London and Birmingham. In London, for example, there are 8 constituencies where the majority of children, more than half of children are living in poverty. Of the nations, they say the problem is starkest in Wales, where there are 31% of children living in poverty. The northeast of England showed the biggest growth in child poverty, they said, over the last 5 years, rising by more than a third. Now, they say this is largely down to rising house prices, stagnating wages. And as you say, these are figures from before the pandemic. And we spoke to one mother who said that for her, the situation since then has got a lot worse.
Children were out of school for a long time. There are a lot of parents that aren't entitled to free school meals, and yet they're still struggling to put meals on the table week in, week out. So that divide with food poverty has been huge. Also, I mean, when you look at kind of like the technological divide, my daughter was working from a mobile phone, and she did that for months because I don't have a laptop or a computer at home. And there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of families that were doing that up and down the country.
And this all plays into uncomfortable debates for the government about things like free school meals, things like ending the temporary uplift to universal credit. They say that child poverty, according to their measure, has actually been improving, but undoubtedly this is uncomfortable reading, particularly when it comes to the rising poverty that this research suggests is happening in the northeast for a government that say that they are all about levelling up the country.
OK, Ali, thank you. Well, still to come on Sky News Breakfast, the reusable face mask with some alarming flaws, at least according to which.
Our job is to tell the truth.
This is a forgotten front line. They are dying here.
Here it comes.
Boy, have we got some interesting ways of showing you what's going on.
Their message to us, get ready.
Nothing like apocalypse.
Instructing you to stay at home.
I can't believe we did that.
It's pretty special, isn't it?
The wind was like pulling us out of that little room.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave.
I'm Greg Milam, Sky's US correspondent here in Los Angeles. It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. You trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
I've seen the dark side of America. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've seen heartbreaking human stories.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Sunshine and showers are on the cards once again for today, and some of the showers will be again heavy and thundery. There will also be cloudy skies and patchy rain sinking southwards from the north of Scotland to the central belt through the day. However, later western parts of the UK and Ireland will become drier and brighter. Tree pollen continues to be airborne with oak, but birch is in decline. Some grass pollen is also airborne now. So in regards to the levels, most places will be moderate today, but high for the northeast of England. And the northeast of Scotland continues to have low levels of pollen for today.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
We're all a bit fed up of these, aren't we? But we know we've got to wear them. Now, this is. I'm using these disposable ones. The problem with them at the moment, though, is how do you get rid of them safely? That causing a lot of concern, actually. So a lot of people wearing the reusable ones. Sounds all good, but do they work as well? Well, new research from consumer group Which has revealed some alarming flaws in the effectiveness of many widely available reusable face masks. One popular one was found to block only a third of potentially harmful particles. Well, let's talk to the head of campaigns at Which, Nina Batty. Good to see you this morning. So what have you discovered here?
So we looked at a range of popular brands and styles of face coverings and masks which were reusable and are widely available from pharmacies, high street stores, supermarkets and online retailers. Our scientists tested reusable masks for how well they filtered particles, how breathable they were, and how they fared after multiple washes. But as you rightly said, we found a wide range in effectiveness, all the way from being able to block 99% of potentially harmful bacteria, all the way to only a third of particles being blocked in the worst performing masks.
In some respects, does it matter in that, I mean, obviously something is better, anything is better than nothing, and the government only says we have to wear a face covering. So if it's not totally effective, is that a huge issue?
I think what was worrying for us was that there were high filtration claims made on the packaging of these masks, and yet they didn't live up to test. So if people are looking for maximum effectiveness and protection because they are worried, actually what they're able to buy isn't really clear for them, and they aren't actually living up to the claims that they're making. We also saw poor packaging instructions across a range of these masks, which actually could again inhibit the maximum effectiveness, all the way from how you should be using the mask so that you can be as safe as possible, and then also those washing instructions. If they are reusable, you want to be able to wash them. What happens after you've washed them a couple of times? What happens to that effectiveness? So really the key thing here is that are these products that are out on the market really living up to those claims, so people can make their own decisions about how effective they want their masks to be.
OK, so which ones cause particular concern for you?
So one of the most popular ones that we saw was the Adidas face covering. It's widely available from stores like ASOS, Next, Sports Direct, but that only blocked a third of potentially harmful bacterial particles. Whereas the best performing that we saw was the Air Pop Pocket. It's a semi-reusable mask, but it had up to 99% filtration effectiveness. So you can really see the wide disparity of masks that you can find on the market, and really means that people need to do a lot of research before they look to buy a mask.
Yeah, I mean, Adidas said our face cover was designed for the general public and is not medically graded, but it can help limit the spread of droplets. I mean, they're not making overreaching claims, are they?
No, they're not. But I think in the last year, there's been a lot of focus on the standards on non-medical face coverings. We all know that we have to use masks, not necessarily use medical masks, but there is a development of standards, which has been a part of. And really what this shows is that there needs to be more oversight to ensure that the basic standards and requirements of these non-medical face coverings are met. So people can have confidence when they're shopping that at least I will get a base minimum protection when I buy any mask in stores.
What about I mean, what did you make of the Boots mask? Because, I mean, they've said they've got full confidence in the filtration claims. It's been rigorously tested and continues to achieve 95% filtration for 10 washes. Does that then, do your results disagree with that?
Our results have shown that actually it doesn't live up to what Boots claims. It'd be interesting to see those test results, but our tests have shown that they haven't lived up to the claims according to what's on their packaging and also how they perform in terms of after washes. We also looked at how breathable these products were and how they, as I said, how they fared after those multiple washes and where their effectiveness went down. So our tests have shown something different around the Boots mask.
OK, Nina, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, time for a check on the weather for you now. Here's Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning to you. Hiding behind me is an area of low pressure out in the Atlantic that is going to be heading its way towards the UK and Ireland from tonight and spread eastwards through tomorrow and Friday, bringing with it very wet and windy conditions. Until then, it's looking like sunshine and showers once again for today. And this morning, it's showery spells of rain and cloudy skies for many central and southeastern parts of England. But with a cloud cover there, it's not as cold as elsewhere, where it's mainly dry and sunny, but chilly with a frost in some spots. Also not so cold across the northeast of Scotland, where there's cloud and patchy rain that will be sinking its way southwards to central parts of Scotland later. The cloud and rain across the southeast will clear away by midday, but then we're seeing sunshine and showers for most places, although later western areas will become a bit dry as high pressure builds briefly before that low pressure system comes in with the wet and windy weather tonight.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, treating the pandemic's teenage victims. We hear from the mental health nurses caring for young people amid a surge in self-harm and eating disorders. It's a disturbing report, but it's worth watching in a couple of minutes.
My name's Ella. I'm an environmental activist and founder of the End Period Plastic campaign. You might be thinking, why period products? What's so bad about them? They're the 5th most common item found polluting Europe's beaches. They're more commonly found than straws or coffee cups.